Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drayhon, and welcome back to Dungeons & Dragons Character Conversion. We are taking a look at the SCP Foundation once again, but this time we are looking at a particular SCP. SCP-4051, also known as Rainer Miller, nicknamed the Friendly Neighborhood SCP. Well, Friendly Neighborhood Keter. Before we get into the actual build, I'm going to go ahead and clear some things up, namely the classifications of the different SCPs. That way you better know what I am talking about when I say Euclid or Keter or Apollyon. The main 5 classifications are Object Class Safe. These SCPs are the easiest to contain within the SCP Foundation. It does not mean they are not dangerous, they are just the easiest to contain. Object Class Euclid. These SCPs are a bit harder to contain and might present some form of hazard. Object Class Keter, or Keter, depending on which YouTuber you are watching when they talk about the SCP Foundation. These are the hardest to contain, near impossible. And a lot of the time, they are very dangerous. Thomil. This object class is for the SCPs that help with countering other SCPs. And the final one is Object Class Apollyon. These are impossible to contain, and they will be hazardous. Some have the chance of being able to start apocalyptic events, known as X-Class events, or K-Class apocalyptic events, end-of-the-world scenarios. Rainer Miller is actually classified as a Euclid-class SCP, when he first came to the SCP Foundation. After a particular event, Rainer was then classified as a Keter-class SCP. I'll get more into that event in a minute. Or you can pause this video and look up SCP-4051 and figure out why for yourself, which I would recommend doing anyway. It's actually a very good read. Starting things off with stats, we'll get into the point by system. He is a teenager according to his file. We'll say by now he's in his late teens, early 20s. Strength will be an 8. We are starting off in the SCP Foundation as a teenager, so it would make sense for a slightly weaker strength. Dexterity will be a 15. He is said to, in one of his therapy sessions, have been a part of cross-country, or cross-country. So, speed would be a bit higher than everything else. Again, he is a teenager, so constitution's probably going to be a little bit low. Not too low, but just low enough. Rainer is said to be above average intelligence, so a 15 should work just fine on his intelligence score. Wisdom will be a 10. He is a teenager after all. There are things that go right over his head, especially certain procedures. And the fact that he might be a little bit more used than he thinks he's being used. Charisma will be a 13. Everybody's an awkward teenager once. 13 will be fair enough for a charisma score. He is a humanoid, so we'll go ahead and give him the race human variant. This will give us an ability score increase of 2 different stats by 1. Go ahead and increase your intelligence and charisma each by 1, making them 16 and 14 respectively. Since we're using the variant, we get 1 skill of choice, grab perception. While things might go over his head, he can still see things out of the corner of his eye pretty darn well, so perception makes sense. For a feat, grab athlete, again going off of the fact that he has been in cross country. So this will increase our dexterity by 1 point and give us a couple of good features. 4 languages, common in one of your choice. Spells that we need to take into consideration when we take a look at classes are Shield, Mage Armor, Knock, Shatter, Creation, and Disintegration. Most of these spells do go off of his power of being able to create whatever object he finds that he needs. Disintegration is actually going off of the latest recorded incident in his file, where he created a negative matter object on accident, which destroyed a lot, including another SCP he had faced. Which is why he got classified as Keter class, because of this incident. Moving on to background, the most likely background would be athlete because of his cross-country background. For your proficiencies, grab athletics and acrobatics. Language, one of choice. Tools, you have access to land vehicles. Favorite event, well, cross-country, so marathon. Feature, echoes of victory. Now, some of you might argue that the Dimir operative would actually be a little bit more fitting for someone who works with the SCP Foundation. And I would have to agree with you. The Dimir operative fits the SCP Foundation's attitude a lot better. But, again, this is mostly for regular SCP Foundation personnel. Raynor doesn't have the same moral compass as the SCP Foundation's staff majority. But we'll go ahead and cover it anyway, because we also get access to some great spells from the Dimir spell list, including Modify Memory, which, honestly, that would reference another incident that Raynor had with one of his experiments. He was to recreate a memetic agent that the SCP Foundation uses to erase memories of civilians, or even their own personnel. This, unfortunately, was a little too successful. I would recommend reading Raynor Miller's file for that particular incident. For your proficiencies as a Dimir operative, you have Deception and Stealth, one language of your choice, the Disguise Kit, the feature, False Identity, and of course, your guild spells. For class, I decided to go with Sorcerer. More specifically, the Sorceress Origin, known as Wild Magic. This will give you the features Wild Magic Surge and Tides of Chaos. This is, again, a reference to the incident that classified him as a Keter class SCP. But also, nothing else really fit Raynor as far as a Sorceress Origin or as a class as a whole. So I decided to go with Wild Magic just so we had some form of identification of what class he might have. We're going to go ahead and multi-class into Artificer. While he was born with these strange powers to create whatever he wanted, he does in fact help out around the SCP Foundation facility he happens to be contained in, mostly with maintenance. This will give you some access to your Tinker's Tools and Thieves' Tools, as well as firearms, even though he probably won't use a gun unless he finds it necessary. You get magical tinkering, and unlike the spellcasting from Sorcerer, which uses Charisma, your Artificer spellcasting is going to be using your Intelligence modifier. Level 2 Sorcerers get your Fount of Magic. Level 2 Artificers get Infuse Item. Level 3 Sorcerers get some metamagic options. Go with Quicken Spell and Subtle Spell. The way you create your objects, you don't really need material components, but you don't need any verbal or somatic components either. So there's that. Also, one of his only escape attempt, he was able to create multiple objects in quick succession, allowing him to make a makeshift Kevlar vest and a bomb, as well as a sort of blast-proof sheet to resist some of the explosion, so he didn't accidentally kill himself in the blast. So, honestly, that makes sense. To be able to create so many items in a short amount of time, you would need the Quicken Spell metamagic. Level 4 Sorcerers get an ability score improvement. I'm pretty sure he has increased his strength at this point, so go ahead and make that a 10. Level 3 Artificers get an Artificer Specialist. We're going to exploring Eberron to grab the Maverick Specialist. I was originally going to go with the Alchemist or the Battlesmith, but neither of those fit Raynor's abilities, so I decided to instead go with the Maverick. This gave us arcane breakthroughs. Go ahead and grab the Wizard spell list to add to the spells that you can choose for your arcane breakthroughs. Cantrip Specialist lets you gain some extra cantrips based off of the cantrips you have access to from your arcane breakthroughs. Just for being an Artificer at level 3, you also get the right tool for the job. You can create whatever set of tools you need, and you are automatically proficient with them. Level 4 Artificers can get an ability score improvement, however, we're going to go with a feat. Grab the Lucky Feat. This is mostly to help with our wild magic surges whenever they might come up. Level 6 Sorcerers get Bend Luck. Pretty darn useful. Level 5 Artificers get the Cantrip Solvent. This will power up our damaging spells in the cantrip list. I believe +1 currently, but at later levels it will increase even further. Level 6 Artificers get Tool Expertise. Now our proficiency bonus for tool checks double. Level 7 Artificer also gets Flash of Genius, which is the main ability that I wanted from the Artificer. And finally, the last level 4 Artificer is going to be level 8. Increase that strength by 2, making it 12. But that's not the end of this build. No. We're just stopping our Artificer levels. Level 8 Sorcerer gets an ability score improvement. Go ahead and increase your intelligence by 2, making it an 18. At level 10, we get more metamagic options. One more metamagic option, actually. And that's going to be the Twinned Spell. So now we get multiple targets for when we have to target a creature with our spell. And finally, level 12 Sorcerer gets us access to another ability score improvement. Increase your dexterity by 2, rounding it off to an 18. And with that, that is the end of this build. I would go over a detailed spell list, but I feel that some spells would actually be less useful for Raynor than others. The ones that I listed at the beginning when I was talking about his race are the ones I highly recommend you use to best fit Raynor's character. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and be on my way, my dear viewers. I do hope that you enjoyed. Next week, I have another set of request videos that I want to go over. So, until next time, this has been Drahon, and I am offline.